Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. Not everyone wanted to see the movie The Passion of the Christ when it came out in 2004. For many, the scenes depicting the crucifixion were too graphic, and many didn't want to face the violent death Christ suffered. But I did see it. But the part that most intrigued me happened right at the very beginning of the movie, not the scene with the cross. The movie begins with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, praying about what is to come. Jesus knows he will be arrested, suffer, and die, and he is fervently praying to avoid it. In the movie, that's when the figure of Satan appears, tempting Jesus to walk away from God's plan. As the temptation continues, a large snake slithers out of Satan's robe and makes its way over to Jesus, who has fallen to the ground. Closer and closer the snake slithers until it finally touches Jesus' arm. At that point, Jesus becomes still and rises, stares at Satan with a resolute expression, and then with his foot crushes the head of the snake. As soon as that happens in the movie, you hear the sound of the soldiers coming to arrest Jesus. It's a powerfully dramatic image, although I want to say that that's how the movie portrays it. The only part about that that's in the Bible is the part about Jesus praying about God's will. Oh, there's one other part there that is in the Bible. That part about crushing the head of the snake with his foot. That part is in the Bible too, but it's not in the gospel story of Jesus. It comes from Genesis and the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. This week we are talking about serpents in the Bible, and yesterday we talked about Adam and Eve and how the serpent tempted them to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. However, we stopped before the end of the story. We stopped as we were talking about how the temptation can seem so enticing and how we should dedicate ourselves to remaining on God's side. But that wasn't the end of the story. What happened next was that Adam and Eve did know the difference between good and evil and realized that in disobeying the command of God, they were on the side of evil. They lost their innocence, and the first thing they did was to make clothes for themselves. You might think of that as the cover-up for what they had done wrong. And then they hid from God. But God found them, and that's when the blame game started up. Adam blamed Eve, Eve blamed the serpent, and the serpent didn't have a leg to stand on. However, God knew the truth, and there was a price to pay for their misdeeds. Crops would no longer grow easily for Adam, and he would have to work hard. Eve would experience pain in childbirth, plus they would have to leave the garden. But the serpent? Well, the serpent was forced to crawl on its belly, and then there is Genesis 3, verse 15. God is speaking to the serpent and says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. Now that may not seem like much, but in fact, this verse has been considered as the first expression of the gospel in the Bible. It's called the Proto-Evangelilcum, or first good news, and it speaks that good will ultimately triumph over evil. And that's what the movie maker so elegantly put into the story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. In the movie, when Jesus crushed the head of the serpent with his heel, God's plan went into action, leading to Jesus' death and resurrection and the ultimate defeat of evil for all time. Good will always defeat evil, for good is on the side of God. May we be on the side of God too. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.